I never thought that I would be 20 something years old when I was then and lost a parent. I had the realistic expectations of you watch your parents get old, inevitably get sick or something, and that's it. They lived a good life, 80s, 90s, whatever that looks like.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Our guest today is Jess Seimers. She's the host of the Panic Button podcast, a mental health advocate who dedicates herself to sharing her story and the stories of others to help other survivors with mental health related concerns feel seen and understood and heard. She's also, and possibly most importantly, the mother of a toddler. She's also a sarcasm enthusiast, which will probably banter a little because I am too. Lego builder, which we'll ask about that. Hopefully that's with your toddler, but if not, what a cool hobby. And a movie watcher. So welcome, Jess. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good, Nick. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. And for those of you who don't know, I met Jess a couple of weeks ago, and I was a guest on the Panic Button podcast. So today, we're going to learn a little bit more about her and her story and starting that podcast and all the work that you do to advocate.
Awesome. Yeah.
But it wouldn't be Eyes Wide Open if I didn't ask you the question of what did you want to be when you were a young kid and then growing up, and how did that change to where you are now?
I haven't been asked that in a really long time, but I always go back to this because it's true, and my mom would probably laugh, but for some reason, I always wanted to be a heart surgeon. I thought it was like super cool. And it's not even like I watched Grey's Anatomy when I was younger, or like Scrubs or whatever was around. I was just like, that would be really cool. Like, get my hands on a heart, like it controls everything. And now I think I would like vomit if
I was
I
going to
saw
ask you
somebody
if you had
like saw somebody with like their chest cavity open, and like, I don't do good with open wounds. So that took a total 180. I actually work in logistics, so nothing related to the medical field whatsoever. So I hope my parents weren't really banking on that.
That's an interesting story, though. I've never had someone on who said they wanted to be a heart surgeon, maybe a doctor. I don't remember.
Yeah, I was like, go big or go home. Like,
right. Well, that's my whole consensus and hypothesis about that question is that you ask people and they have these like grand dreams when they're a kid, and then they just don't ever live those out. Not ever. Some people have. And it's interesting to me to see, because sometimes there's like a red line that's fun to follow. But other times it's just interesting to hear that story of where we go. Were there any stops in the way when you were a teenager or in high school or?
No, I don't think so. Like, I still today, I love the medical field. Like, it's very intriguing to me. But as I got older, I was kind of like, maybe that's not the best route for me. And then at one point in college, I was like, do I want to be a dermatologist? Like, but then I ended up with a communication degree. So really, I just fucked around. I just did a typical 180, like nothing medical related, but it's all very interesting to me still till this day. I love reading, medical journals, and I do watch Grey's Anatomy. I've watched every single episode.
Is it still on?
It's still on. It is going strong. And, it's totally changed. So it's just like.
Is anyone from the like starting seasons on anymore? Is it just.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a handful of them who are still on. I mean, it's definitely not as good and it's very predictable as it's always been. But I think I'm just like so invested in like what's next at this point. Like, I can't give up on something I've watched for like 10 years. Like, it's like losing a friend. So I just gotta turn it on and watch it at this point.
That's the relationship I have with The Walking Dead. It's like,
well, there you go.
I got into it. I'm watching it. There were some really bad seasons. I'm like, well, I got to stick this out. And then I stuck it out to the end. And then it's like 5 different spinoffs, and I tried them all. And I actually think I'm good being done with The Walking Dead. I haven't been able to, but I get that feeling. I have that same feeling.
Yeah. And you're like, you left a friend behind.
Right. And you've got to see how it ends. You got to see how it ends.
Right.
even though it's like nowhere near the people. But that's what they do so good when they like incorporate new characters in that become regular characters, and all
Right.
of a sudden you're invested in like these people you didn't even know in the show
Right.
5 years ago. So I get it.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
get it.
They do pretty good at that. So yeah, I'm hooked for sure.
So is that your favorite TV show?
Um, honestly, probably not. I am a huge Drag Race fan, to be honest. RuPaul
Oh,
all the
cool.
way. Like it's just entertaining, like, and it's great. So, but
That's
I don't
very
even I
cool.
don't have cable. I'm one of those like weird people. Even though I think a lot of people these days don't. They
I
just
don't
do
have
like
cable.
streaming and stuff.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
haven't had it in 10 years.
exactly. So like, I just stream a lot, but yeah, Drag Race would probably take the cake, but Grey's
By
Anatomy is up there.
by the way, have you noticed? Did we talk about this? I talked about this with someone around the same time I recorded your podcast. So if we did, we
Now
can
you're
not
making me
take it over.
nervous. What?
No. So I remember when I cut the cord 10 years ago, I was like, F you, Comcast, right? And then I was like, I'm just going to have Netflix. And then I'm going to have Peacock. And I'm going to have HBO Max. And now you have just as many streaming services as you were paying for cable. And I'm like,
Seriously,
they
right?
tricked us. They tricked us. It's
Big
so
time. Oh yeah, I mean in the same way I have like Netflix, Hulu, Peacock,
yeah.
Disney Plus, like, and then Amazon Prime does their whole Amazon Video. So, oh yeah, like at the end of the day, you probably do end up spending like roughly the same amount without having to deal with the shitty customer service of Comcast. I mean,
Right. Well, there
you
is
know,
no customer service on
well, right.
streaming, so I don't know if that's a black box. But
Yeah.
and I think I've lost my bat line to Netflix. So, but yeah, that's so interesting. So the reason I asked that is because you said you told me you're an avid movie watcher, a big movie watcher. So what type of movies do you like to watch, and what are your favorites?
Yeah, I'm super like not picky when it comes to movies, except for I do draw the line at like covering my eyes, scary shit. But
Mm,
I just for the first time have seen the Screams because my partner loves the Screams.
I
And I'm just like,
love the
okay.
screams.
I'm like, all right, like this is kind of good. I like these. But my favorite go-to that I could watch all the time is Back to the Future, hands
Heck
down.
yeah, the
Like
original one.
it's all of them, but the original
Yeah.
is the best for sure.
See, I
Yes,
think
yes.
two. Well, I will say, when I was a kid, I thought three was the best. I thought it was so cool that they were cowboys. And then as I got older, I was like, no, two's the best. But now I think I might think one is the best. I haven't
It,
watched them in a couple
yeah.
years, but
Yeah, it like dabbles between 1 and 2, and I was never a huge fan of 3 because I'm like, all
three's
right,
pretty bad.
what are we doing here? But 1 or 2 for sure. Yeah, that's like my go-to. I'm a huge dork with that movie. I love it.
I love
Big
those too. I grew
fan.
up on those.
Yeah.
Those are great. But I have to say, like the Scream movies are some of my all-time favorites. I mean, I own them. I've
Did you
streamed
see the
them.
last one that just came
Oh
out?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I went and saw it the night it came out. Yeah,
Yeah. It was pretty
I
good. I enjoyed it because that was the
it's my
first
I
one
think
I
it's
ever saw.
oh interesting. That's a good one it's like a good one to see first if you're going to see one that's first. That's not the first one because it only had really one character from the original series,
That's what
which
I
was
had been told.
Gail,
Yeah.
yeah, Courtney Cox. But now I don't know if you saw the news, depending on how big you or your partner are, but Nev Campbell's coming back for the next one to play Sidney Prescott again. It just came out yesterday or the day
Oh,
before. Yeah,
yeah, that's exciting then.
she's getting a little bit of backlash, but because I don't know if I'm a dork, okay, scary movie dork, but they fired the new lead actress Melissa Barrera, and then Jenna Ortega left as well, and
Oh, okay.
whether or not it's related, nobody knows, but it was because Melissa was speaking out against or speaking out on the Gaza and Israel thing, and so the production company fired her, which is
Sure.
insane. Like
Yeah.
insane. So there's a little bit of backlash there, but I think I'll have to figure out how I feel about seeing it again. But I'm excited that there's another one because
Yeah.
they're so fun. And the latest one was it was the same, but it was so different. It was like edge of your seat action movie like as opposed to horror movies.
I enjoyed it again. It wasn't your typical like scary movie,
Mm-hmm.
so I was a big fan. Yeah, definitely like you said, if it was the first one to see, I would see that one again and again.
Yeah.
But now I'm
Yeah.
kind of like going backwards and like watching them backwards. So we'll see.
It's
I would be
good.
excited for another one. I'm down for that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Very cool. So, you started a few months back. You started the Panic Button podcast, and I know a little bit about your background. You some generalized anxiety, some mental health challenges that you've learned to deal with, and I would love to hear your journey, like uncovering your mental health challenges, because we'll get to the advocacy, right? We'll get to the podcast and why you started that. But I like to I'd like to know that, because I know mine was so disjointed. And I think we talked about it, but like I didn't know what the hell was going on with me from the time I was a kid until like my 20s.
Right.
A little bit in high school. I knew in high school I was embarrassed. So from my depression. So I was embarrassed in high school. I didn't really talk about it. And then I didn't really talk about it until 5 years ago. Like I just kind of hit it. So I'm curious, like when did you first start experiencing symptoms? What was going on in your life? How was your support system? And how did you kind of triangulate around what was going on with you?
Yeah. So the earliest that I could date back to it was college. But now that I'm an adult and like older, I kind of have realized that I think I always had a little bit of anxiety and like, excuse me, anxious tendencies. I was the kid like growing up where like I was scared when my mom left the house, she was not coming back. So I was like, as an adult, I'm like, that's not that mentally good.
No, that's anxiety.
Like that's like anxiety, whatever we want to call it, that's what it was. And it didn't
Did you think
obviously.
something was going to happen to her, or were you
Yeah,
afraid she was leaving?
I was just like up her butt. Like I didn't even want to go to school sometimes. She tells me stories all the time where like, she's like, oh yeah, you would wake up and you're like, I'm not going to school because I don't know if you'll be here when I come home. It's like, I don't know, like what had made me feel that way or like what had happened. But yeah, she's like, oh yeah, you were terrified. You like never wanted to leave. And I mean, to this day, like that's my best friend, we're inseparable. We're very close. Obviously, like I'm not like I could be away from her now. Like it's okay.
I was like, do you want to spin the camera so we can say hi to her?
Right? She's over here. Right? No, so that's kind of where it started, but kind of just went underneath the rug. Like, I didn't really think anything of it. Nobody really thought anything of it.
It wasn't common to talk about it either.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't common to talk about it. I don't think that parents really had the right tools to talk about it with their kids either. It was kind of like, oh, they'll grow out of it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Like, they're not hurting anyone. That was like the main concern. Like, are they hurting themselves or anyone else?
Yeah.
No? Okay, fine.
Yeah,
like, let's move on.
Quit being a baby, man up.
Right.
Why do you cry?
Yeah, exactly. So that was totally how that was. So I didn't really have any experiences with anxiety per se that I understood until my senior year of college. So, in your 20s, just figuring out life and what you're doing and having a good time away from at school, I just started feeling like not right. Like I would get dizzy and very panicky. And I thought honestly that I had like a health condition where I was like, this is not like something's wrong. And I ended up going to the doctor on my campus, which, college campus is not like you're going to like the best
cream
of the
crop.
best.
Yeah.
Like, you're just going into like the local center or whatever that got the bowl of condoms when you walk in, like, just so, I went in there and they did some tests as much as they could do. And they're like, it sounds like you are having panic attacks. And I was like, okay.
So they were testing you for physical stuff, not.
They did, yeah. So they did like a general like blood panel, and nothing came back like super weird. And since I was getting dizzy, they wanted to make sure like I wasn't like anemic or had an issue with my sugar. It's like just general like baseline things. And they're like, the way that it sounds and you're explaining it, it sounds like you have anxiety and you're experiencing panic attacks. So, okay, they give me a prescription for Lexapro. And that was it. They're like, here is the phone number for the
I didn't know
therapist on
school
campus.
doctors could give, I guess they're actually doctors, so they can
Yeah.
prescribe.
So,
Yeah, okay.
it was an actual like medical doctor. So yeah, I mean,
I was
and
thinking
you're
more
on
like school nurse, like from
right,
back in the day,
right.
right?
Yeah, she gave me a sucker on the way out too, so it
Yeah.
was fine.
Took your
Got my
temperature, sent
sticker.
you back to
Yeah.
class, gave you a sticker.
Right. But yeah, so they're like, here's the phone number for the school therapist as well. You might want to talk to them. But didn't really give me a lot more information other than that. So it was kind of like, here's your medicine, see you later. They're like,
Yeah.
I would follow up with your primary physician when you're able to go home. So like a week later, I did end up going home because it got worse.
Did
They
you see the
gave
school therapist at all, or were they
I
not?
did like a handful of times.
Okay.
She was like, oh, I think you're fine. Like, it's general anxiety. Like, you're in college. This is what happens. And I'm like, okay, like, whatever. I guess I'm fine. Like, as long as I'm not dying, I'm good. Like, so I'm like,
Two
all
medical
right.
professionals telling me I'm fine. What?
Right.
That must be fine.
I'm in college. I'm like, all right. So I was like, can I drink taking this medicine? Or, like, that was my concern.
They tell you no, but from
Right.
experience, you can.
But
Maybe you shouldn't.
yeah, I ended up having, I was allergic to Xanax actually. So it made things worse for me. So I ended up in the emergency room. Yeah. So having a panic attack, took Xanax to relax, and ended up in the emergency room. So I was there one night, like 2:00 in the morning, called my mom freaking out. I'm like, I'm dying. I'm having a heart attack. The whole spiel when you get in that mindset. And they were like, oh, we think you have a blood clot in your chest. And I'm like, here we go.
God.
Like, I'm like ready to like vomit all over the hospital. Like at night, I was there by myself in a college town, 4.5 hours away from home.
You actually might get to experience open heart surgery after wanting to do that when you were younger. That's
right. I was like, oh, good. I'm almost going to live it out though. No,
so that's awful.
They did all the testing, and they did a CT scan. It came back that it was not a blood clot, and they were asking me like, what medications do you take? And I told them, they're like, oh, okay, like this sounds like a panic attack, and you are having obviously a reverse reaction with the Xanax. So they're like, I would advise you to go to talk to your primary physician and go home whenever you can. So the next morning I got on the train and went home. And I'm from the northwest suburbs, as you know. So I got on a 4.5 hour train, came home, and went to see my primary physician. And he basically said the same thing. It all checked out. It all sounded like anxiety. But what he had diagnosed was the panic disorder, because he wanted to know how the panic attacks were coming on, when they were coming on, how that looked like.
That's what my next question for you is going to be, like, what was triggering these for you if you knew?
Yeah. We never really knew. And still till this day, we kind of make a joke about it, and I make a joke about it myself, because if we don't laugh, like, what are we doing? That's always like my idea of it. I just try to, I know it's a very sensitive topic and it's very meaningful, but I had to pick at myself a little bit,
Totally.
I'm like, oh, it's Tuesday. I could have a panic attack just because it's Tuesday and it's sunny out. Like, who knows? It just happens. Like, there's no rhyme or reason. Like, I could just be walking and I'm going down. Like, so
that's how I feel too.
Way.
With my depression, it's like sometimes I just wake up one day and I'm Eeyore, and it's just kind of, I don't have a real reason. Nothing's really changed. I'm just off today.
Yeah. Yep. And I still experience those days. But that was the big thing for the doctor when I was explaining my situation, where he's like, okay. And he gave me some more information and like reading to do on it. And I was like, yeah, this is me. Like, where like you felt like the walls were closing in. I kind of would just space out, got very lightheaded, dizzy. So when I was regularly taking the Lexapro, I was good after a couple months.
It does take a few months. I was on Lexapro too.
It takes a few months, yeah. And then I couldn't take Xanax anymore. So they gave me Ativan for panic attacks, which was
I've never heard of that. Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it was incredible. Honestly, like, it was great. It did exactly what it needed to do, and things got better. I graduated, and I came home and I moved out, and life was okay. Life was good, and it was manageable. I knew that every couple of months I would have a panic attack, or I knew what to do, and like life just went on. Like, it wasn't a part of every day anymore. I wasn't worrying about it. And I got out of college, so all those stressors went away. But then life happened. I got married, I had a baby, got divorced. So I did the whole thing, and then COVID hit as soon as my son was born.
Oh my
And then
gosh.
it was a lot. And then my dad passed away 2 years ago. So in the past like 5 years, I've dealt with a lot, and it's funny, people that I tell my story to, they're like, you literally listed like the top 3 stressors that we can deal with besides like losing a job. I'm like, oh, don't even put that into the world, like the
No, no,
atmosphere right
that's
now. Cause they're like, you got divorced, you lost a parent, so I'm like, yeah, well, good batting average, I guess. So
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of what that's looked like for me. And recently, in November of last year, I just kind of hit a wall. I had my gallbladder removed, as I've told you before a little bit on my story or with my podcast, and then I got COVID the next day as I was recovering.
Oh
So that
my
was like a double
gosh.
F
That's
you.
forgot about
Yeah,
that.
and it honestly put me into a spiral. It was not good for my mental health. I couldn't see my son. It was terrible. It really took away my routine, and I am such a routine person. And I think a lot of us who battle mental illnesses are, because we like what's familiar, we like what's safe, all those things that make us feel good, and taken care of. And I got that taken away from me when I had just had surgery when I needed it the most. And yeah, I came out of it and I called my physician. I'm like, I am not good. Like, we need to figure something out. I'm taking 2, 3 Ativan and it's doing nothing,
Jeez.
like, so they gave me a different prescription for panic attacks. And then it kind of got a little bit better. But I was like, you know what? I think I need to talk to a psychiatrist, somebody who
Mhm.
specializes in this and can help a little bit more. Like, obviously, my primary physician is great, but just a little bit more in depth to understand what's going on and what I can do.
Well,
So
I
I
think
talked
that
to a
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say I talked to the psychiatrist and they did end up, after 7 years on Lexapro, changing my medication. So that's been the boat I'm on now, which has been it's been interesting to say the
So,
least.
is it a roller coaster?
It was, yeah, because I stopped taking the Lexapro cold turkey and then they switched me to
You they
Zoloft.
did you cold turkey?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Why?
they're like,
That's I
they're
thought that
like,
was
just
dangerous.
so I guess for SSRIs, it's not, because Zoloft is in the same family.
Yeah.
It just operates a little bit differently in your brain.
Right.
So, I mean, it worked. Like, I feel great, better than I have in
Okay.
a long time, but it took time
Good.
to get here. It definitely did. And they had told me, when you're making the transition, your anxiety is going to get worse before it gets better. And I felt that. I mean, I had a panic attack every day for like 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
So I was exhausted. I was like a zombie. I'm like, okay, we got to figure something out. Like, I have a child. I cannot, like, be operating
Right.
and functioning like this.
Right.
But it's finally, we're at a good place. So it's
Well,
kind
I'm
of
glad to
everything in a
hear that.
nutshell.
Yeah. Can I ask you if we hit we go back to the future button here. So I'm always interested to hear your COVID experience, because what happened during COVID is those who are suffering with mental health struggles or even mental illness, they were impacted, but sometimes they were the people in my life, I shouldn't say they so generally, but like some of the people in my life actually were better than I would have thought. And myself kind of included, and I can get to that in a minute, but a lot of people who never had struggles with anxiety or depression or loneliness developed the mental health
Yeah.
challenges that so many of us kind of um, had been battling. And I know people on both sides of it. So I'm curious, like, what your experience is. And mine was, at first, I was like, I'm an introvert. I'm built for this. But I was just coming out of a very rough breakup for me. And so one of the things that was very hard was being stuck in my head all the time. And just the other thing was hard that you touched on was the structure that I had spent so much time putting in my place, so that
Yeah.
I didn't end up too much, or I didn't end up spending too much time like not doing stuff, because then I spiral, right? And I spiraled last weekend. Totally had a fucking meltdown on Sunday. Like it was a
Done that,
rough
done that,
day.
man.
Yeah, it was a really, really rough day. And it was daylight savings time. You know, you already feel funky. But
Oh
you know,
yeah.
at first I was like, I'm made for this. And then I went down a negative spot during COVID. And then I bounced back and I felt like I got to the best place I had ever been. But I had to put in new structure. Like my yoga classes that I would do were gone. My Thursday happy hours that my guy friends and I would do all the time, gone.
Yeah.
Everything was gone. I couldn't even go. And I just sold my car the week before lockdowns because that's the story of my life. So what was it like for you going into COVID, the initial pieces, and then how you kind of navigated it, if it was even a challenge for you?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a challenge. I'm not gonna say that it wasn't. I think I had like that whole fear factor though instilled in me where I was just like terrified for my son.
Of course, a new baby too.
Yeah, because I'm like, what am I doing? We're bringing me and my partner at the time. She was the one who gave birth to our son, and I was scared for her and scared for him and what that would look like for all of us. Um, you know, Groceries coming in, you're cleaning them, scrubbing them down.
God,
And
so
I mean,
crazy
my
to think
family hadn't
about.
even met my son for months because we're like, not going to
Wow.
happen, So my mom and other family on my ex-partner's side, they had not met him for 2-3 months. And yeah, it was weird, because even in the hospital, like I remember going to the hospital and I was the only one allowed to be there. And like this was our first kid. So we're like, holy shit, like I don't know what to do. Like, do you know what to do? And so, and they take your temperature, everyone's walking around with like body suits, and I'm just like, I don't feel good about this. Like,
Yeah.
but I think that mentally I was preoccupied by my son, so he was the best distraction, but I was just scared. I was really scared for him, and scared being a mom doing this myself. Usually you have resources, you have family that comes to help you. We were both sleep deprived, me and his other mom, and
Yeah.
it was just navigating it on our own. So I was very fortunate enough that I guess all I faced was just being scared. I didn't have like the mental breakdown. I wasn't depressed, and I was still working. I work from home and I still do, and I did back then. So that was easy. I had that to preoccupy myself. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I just think from a standpoint, I was just like, I had the right tools already going into it, and I knew what my mental health looked like.
Yep.
So I think that's where it gets a little bit easier for people regarding the pandemic. A lot of us that went in having mental health concerns, we had those tools. It's the people that didn't that kind of like drove them nuts in reality. And yeah, those people really struggled and still struggle. I know a lot of people that it really like swallowed them and shit them out. Like, and it's still a scary time.
Exactly, and you don't go back. That's the thing. Is like, I have a friend who experienced anxiety and panic attacks and all this stuff after like a couple weeks of COVID, and it was her structure. Like she didn't have those issues beforehand,
Right.
but when her structure was taken away, you develop them. And I remember thinking, I think to myself, you put it exactly right. You have the tools already, and that doesn't mean it was easy. I'm sure you had rough days too. I know I did, but I remember thinking, I'm like, well, thank God I am like okay being alone, because if I wasn't okay being alone and I wasn't introverted and I didn't have like my walks are so important to my mental health.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, like if I didn't have that, if they really were like, you can't leave your house, which was, remember at times they were like, you're not gonna be able to leave your house unless you're going here, here, or here, right? It's like, what? I remember like that was where I got scared. But it was really hard to watch some people really develop, these challenges because of being locked down and taking out. The other thing too is I experienced my first panic attack about probably a year and a half ago. And I remember, like, I have heard from being in high school, I had a friend that had panic attacks. And, I was very aware of what happens, right, when someone has one. And just from secondhand experience, when I had one, I thought I was dying.
Oh yeah.
I was like, I remember I was just down the street over here, and my heart clenched, and I started gagging, and I couldn't like catch my breath, and I was like, I'm gonna puke. Oh my god, I'm gonna puke. And it's all while like my heart is just like
Yeah.
tightening up, and I felt like it was like pulsating, but it was like tightening up with each pulse and getting like tighter and tighter, and I had to like sit down on the stoop of a little like box that a tree is in, and I was like, oh my god, like this is it, goodbye. So and
No, you're not wrong, so I'm not laughing to like make fun of you.
No.
Like you're right.
No. No, and it's like I having a little bit of experience with people in my life, and also, you know, my ex-wife Danielle, like having people in my life, I still didn't think, oh, that's what's going on. So
Right.
someone who's never experienced it before, suddenly experiencing it during COVID or for whatever reason, it's scary. Just like your first experience, it's scary.
Oh yeah. I mean, still till this day, if it happens, it's terrifying because me personally, I still feel like every time that's how I'm gonna die. You like can't convince yourself that you're not, or at least like I can't yet. I'm not there yet. Where it's very powerful, you know, and it really does alter your like what's going on in that moment. Like, you know, you go from 0 to 100, and it really does make you feel like this is how it ends.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's terrible.
What was it like raising a new baby during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, it was good because we got all of the time with him, you know, so that was good. Like, we didn't have to rush to bring him to daycare or anything because they weren't taking kids, you know, daycares were closed. So we kept him at home a lot longer than expected, but I think it really created a good bond between me and him, and then him and his mom. The three of us are very close. So that's still something that we've kept today while we're co-parenting him, is we're a little tight-knit community, you know, just the three of us, because you didn't have a choice. You know, you learned the ins and outs, and it was sink or swim. Like, you know, all the things I thought I was ready for, no, I wasn't. You know, like you read books on how to be a parent or like what to do. Yeah, until you're doing it, you don't know. Like, you know, I love like self-help books and all of that, but until you go through the situation and you're physically doing it, you know, it's never the same, and nothing prepares you for that like you'd like it to. But I mean, it was great because I got all the time that I needed. But, you know, I wish circumstances were different. You know, we didn't get to do a lot of firsts with him. And a lot of his bursts were like actually when he was 2. So it was like seconds, you know? Yeah. So, but yeah, looking back on it, you know, I wouldn't change it. It's just, it's scary for him. You know, he actually got COVID when he was like 6 months old. So yeah, he got COVID, and we're just like, what do we do? You know, we were terrified. I mean, I'm sure it ran through his other mom's mind that he might not make it. And I was thinking the same thing, you know, we're like, we know nothing about this. You see people just passing away on the news, and you know how terrifying they made it seem. So yeah, that was scary. So
they scared the shit out of people.
3 of us got COVID together. So
yeah.
And
the media scared the shit out of people. And when I look back on it, I am like appalled by how this was handled. And now they just act like, treat it like the flu.
Oh, yeah.
What?
Oh, I mean, yeah. Have you even heard the CDC literally just came out and said that the quarantine now is 24 hours?
Yep.
So before we were 7 to 10 days, now it's like, oh, I have COVID, but you want to hang out tomorrow? What? Like, it's crazy, man. It's so crazy.
I know. You know, I've had COVID twice. The first time I had it, I couldn't believe the brain fog. I had the sore throat. Yeah, I had the sore throat a little bit. I was stuffy, but it wasn't. What would get me is the brain fog. Like, I'd be sitting here chatting with you right now, and I would just like go someplace else and just not be able to like pull myself, or walk into the room to go get something and just completely forget what I got, and then be tired. It was the second time. Yeah, the second time it was more like a head cold, and I got rid of it in 4 days. I just like
Yeah.
Just did vitamin D, vitamin C, Sudafed, which we weren't supposed to do, but it's the only thing that made my head feel better. I don't think
You
you're
weren't
supposed to do
supposed to do it, but
Sudafed
it's
on
fine.
COVID. Yeah, I was just like, I'm going to try this because I think it's the only thing that's going to make my head feel better. And it did. So I was like, whatever. This is how I go. I go for
Right.
mixing Sudafed and COVID. I guess it was meant to
Then
be.
you know what? Yeah. It was nice knowing you guys. I actually had it 4 times.
4 times.
I think I'm like the COVID champion of my family. Yeah.
My best friend's had it, I think, 5 times.
Ugh.
He was the first one in the group to get it, and he's just getting it ever since.
You know, and it's like, I thought that like when I got it, like I was like, okay, I'm probably not gonna get it again, you know, one of those things. And I was like, I got it again.
Well, they told us that.
Right. Like you'd have some immunity. And like I
Yeah.
even got vaccinated because my mom has an autoimmune disease and I had a little baby at home. So I'm like, all right, I'll take one for the team. Like, let's do this. Yeah. No. 4 times.
4 times. Jeez.
Yep.
Was it bad each time? Or was it the same?
I kind of agree with what you said. Like each time it got a little bit better. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I had some immunity and I was vaccinated, but you know, the worst was definitely like the last time though, since I just had my gallbladder removed.
I can't even
You know, 'cause
imagine.
I'm just like, you know, I don't know if it's just because the physical abdominal pain or what, but luckily I did take that. I got that Paxlovid, that prescription they give you now if you get it. I mean, and within a day or two, it did feel like just a general cold, but the headache and the brain fog, like you said, is so unbelievably
I forgot about the headache.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, it was so bad.
Time. My headache's the second time. So this was like a horrible, the last time I had was like a horrible week for me. It was one of the worst weeks probably ever. I had had a media frenzy, we'll just say. I lost my job. I woke up later that week and lost my job, wasn't feeling well, tested positive for COVID, was like out of commission with a headache Thursday evening, Friday, Saturday. Sunday, I was supposed to go to the annual Bears-Lions game, and we tailgate that my friends and I do every year. Thankfully, I hadn't bought a ticket yet because I was going to just wait. Both teams sucked. I was going to wait till the last minute and get a cheap one. But I woke up and I'm like, I have COVID, 5-day, whatever. And then later that day, I tested negative. So it was like, that's freaking annoying. But anyway, yeah, it was just the headaches. I remember that now. The headache the second time was like, it felt like someone was like poking me here.
It's
Just
like
continuously.
so much pressure. It was like unbearable. Yeah.
Awful. Well, I hope you hold it 4 and don't make
I know, right? I don't want to take like the heavyweight champion belt. Like I'm good.
right. Exactly.
I'm good.
So,
I learned 4, we're done.
So I do want to say I'm glad to hear that like you didn't experience the same, not the same. You didn't experience like setbacks that drastically with your mental health during COVID. But when you were coming into, what was it, November, you said, when you had the gallbladder, the COVID, that's 4 months ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was going on at that time for you? And then you kind of channeled that into starting the Panic Button podcast. And I remember you saying, I think we were done recording. I can't remember. It might've been on the podcast, but you had said a little bit about it. And I'm curious, what was going on for you that kind of turned things upside down?
Yeah, so I had mentioned a little bit before in 2022, my dad had passed away super sporadically. And that, itself was traumatizing. He literally just dropped dead while he was driving. And I didn't even get notified. We got a call from our cousin that was like, police showed up at our door and your dad passed away. And I'm like, it was like 7:00 in the morning. I'm like, what's going on? I called my brother. Right. I called my brother and he's like, yeah, I got the same news. So here's me like full blown panic mode. Like that was it. That's all it took. Called hospitals everywhere in the area. And they're like, yeah, we can't give you any information. And I'm like, I'm his daughter. So eventually I got in touch with the sheriff who knocked on my cousin's door. And they're like, yes, like your dad passed away this morning. And I'm like, just like drop the phone. Like, didn't know what was going on, like got like that whole like, like the world was caving in. And yeah, like just since then, we didn't really find out what had happened. They couldn't do an autopsy because he had COVID. He was COVID positive. So they don't do autopsies, excuse me, on those
Oh, I
that
didn't know
passed of
that.
COVID. Yeah, I don't know if they've changed it now, but 2 years ago they didn't.
Oh, you know
Um,
why? I do know why. It's because
why?
the hospitals get paid for sure because the government was paying for COVID deaths. So if somebody tested positive for COVID, they marked them as COVID. They know they'd
Oh
get
yeah,
paid. And so, yeah, that's why. It isn't because they thought they were going to catch something. It's because it
right.
was a
Oh yeah, it's all about the money.
a financial incentive. Yeah, so
Right.
bullshit. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's
Oh,
horrible.
yeah. No, absolutely. So like, and I know for a fact, like COVID is not why he passed away. They were able to do some other tests or whatever, not a full autopsy, but it looked like it was something with his heart inevitably.
Mm,
So I mean, that's all that we knew. That's all that we found out. He showed up to the hospital. He was already pronounced dead, or like they only took him to the hospital to pronounce him dead. I guess he had stopped breathing on the scene as soon as they found him in his car. So yeah, just total bizarre, like that was just, it was weird. Didn't feel real. It still doesn't feel real. So the way that like we process things is just crazy because I'm just like, you hear news and I just like want to call my dad. It like still hasn't like clicked, so that was big for me and very life changing. I never thought that I would be 20 something years old when I was then and lost a parent. I had the realistic expectations of you watch your parents get old, inevitably get sick or something, and that's it. They lived a good life, 80s, 90s, whatever that looks like.
yeah.
Yeah, so definitely taken way too soon, way too quick. So that's a uneasy thing to deal with, especially because again, like it was like, what happened? Like we
I
don't
can't.
know, so
How
it's like
can
so
you wrap
many,
your head around that? You can just
right?
write endless stories about what could have happened.
Oh yeah, I have so many dreams and I've made up so many scenarios in my head of like probably what happened and I'm sure none of them are true and my dad is probably somewhere laughing at me that like,
Hmm.
one of them was like he was doing something. I don't even know. It's just like, when you have your dreams it's on your mind at night but yeah, so that was crazy for me. I'm still battling that. It looks a lot better now, but it's definitely more real now than it was pretty raw before, but I have a lot of milestones coming up, which has made it hard for me mentally. And
Mm,
like going back to November when you're like, what changed? I did had my gallbladder removed, like we said, and then I got COVID. So I think it was just a lot that piled on at once finally that I had snapped,
yeah.
because I never really think that I processed my dad's death appropriately. I had to be strong for my son. And that was hard, and his other mom was very supportive. My partner now very supportive. I couldn't have done it without my partner. We were long distance at the time, and she came home the minute she found out. So
Mm,
4-hour drive, came home and stayed with me and did whatever I needed. And so I have a great support system. My mom was there with me. My brother was there. His wife. So we're a very close knit family. We were all there for it, so that was good. But it's just like there's no handbook on how to deal with death. So we all grieve differently.
yep.
I had lost family before. I had lost my great grandparents. I was fortunate enough to have my great grandma. She lived to be 100. I had seen her pass away. So I had lost people in my life. But when you lose a parent, that's a direct like link to you. Like, that person brought me into this world. Like he was part of the reason of why I'm alive. He gave me life. So it was different. It was hard. It wasn't a normal loss. Um, so yeah,
And
I never
everybody
felt like I
grieves
dealt with
different.
it. Right.
Yeah. And not only that, but I have this newish theory. Someone smarter probably came up with it and I'm just stealing it. So whatever. But grief, we've been taught, is linear. Like you go through the 6 stages of grief. Grief
Yep.
is not linear. Like
No.
I get to acceptance, and then before I know it on something, I'm back to angry. You know what I
Yep.
mean? It's like, and I've really, since my time on Love Is Blind and everything that's happened since then, I haven't even made it to acceptance once, but I go back and forth between all the other ones, and I think you
Oh
just go
yeah.
back and forth, and when you don't get the closure, which the closure for you
Right.
would have been knowing what happened.
Yeah.
Would
So it's like I have to
it's
create like my own story and just like end it myself. And I haven't been able to close that door yet because I don't
mm,
want to believe that it just happened and it's just done, you know? So yeah, that's
oh,
definitely been kind of, I don't think that it's fully responsible for where my mental health is at today, but I think it's got a good chunk of it. You know, it's hard. It's definitely hard. It's harder even being a parent, experiencing losing a parent, because it makes you look at that relationship a lot different as well. So just all around was very difficult. You know, started going to therapy in November to really figure out what was going on, what had changed. You know, and I thought something was wrong with me again. I think anxiety tends to make us feel like something is physically wrong with us.
mm,
When, you know, it's not. You just got to take a step back and be able to have those tools to talk yourself out of things and give yourself grace and be very present and understanding. But yeah, I think again, I've never been a person that was very in tune with their feelings. And surprising because I have a podcast that talks about mental health.
right,
So I
right.
had to go 180. But you know, I think it just, again, it all piled up at once and it was a lot. And it finally just hit me and I experienced a breaking point and I had to just like dig myself out of the hole that I kind of put myself in.
Yeah. You know, I say this to people, including myself, all the time, but the thing with having any kind of mental health challenge, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's something else, our whole lives are going to be peaks and valleys, right? And you said the hole and digging yourself out. The way I try to think about it and the way I encourage others to think about it when I get the opportunity is your whole life's going to be peaks and valleys. But when you're in the valley, set up a campsite, don't buy property, right?
Yep.
So like that's the mindset I try to get myself in.
Oh, sure.
Like, and you know what it used to be? Well, it can't get worse than this. And then it always found a way to get worse than this. So I had
I
to
was like,
shift
hold
my
on.
thinking. Yeah, I literally like about a year ago, I was like, I am on a non-stop quest to find rock bottom, and I haven't found it yet. And I'm like, I keep
Yeah.
thinking I find it, and then there's a trap door to go a little bit lower. So I think it's I think that's so fair to hear you say, and so important to kind of like recognize, and also like the feelings piece. Like most people are not in touch with their feelings or how they feel at all,
Right.
at all. I used to not be. I didn't know why I was so irritable all the time or why I was always so sarcastic and snarky to people. And even now I'm like, you know, I have these feelings of like I'm not enough, right? I'm not doing enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not a good enough, you know, husband, I'm not a good enough friend, all of these things.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, until you really learn the tools to regulate, talk to yourself,
Right.
you know, reframe stuff, you don't like we don't stand a chance in hell.
Right. Yeah. Until we can figure out how to honestly walk again. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not
So
it.
what was rock all right, rock bottom's my word. What was your whole like? Like what were the things you were experiencing and feeling?
Yeah, I just kind of felt like a piece of poop, to be honest, like not worthy of the life that I had. Just kind of having a pity party, like, why me? Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? You know, really just questioning my existence. You know, I'm very fortunate enough that I've never had you know, suicidal thoughts or anything along those lines. I've never battled depression. But you know, anxiety does have a funny way of creeping up on you on situations that just make you feel like this is never going to end. You know, but tried to make sure I surrounded myself with good people that informed me that that wasn't the case and that nothing was wrong with me. Like we were going to figure this out. But yeah, it was just like a pity party, you know. But I didn't probably experience it how a lot of people did because I do have a child, you know. So he's a great distraction still till this day. But it was just a lot of self doubt if I really had to like wrap it up
Yeah.
in one like word.
Right. So then how did you turn that self-doubt into the Panic Button podcast?
Yeah, so I mentioned I started therapy in November because I was like, okay, I gotta figure something out. Like, I will try new medication. That's great, but medication only gets you so far. So I talked to a therapist still
Get you to
every
the
Tuesday.
baseline. That's what my therapist says. She's like,
Right.
medication helps some people get to the baseline.
Right.
And that doesn't,
Yeah.
it's
Like
not a
it's
cure all. So
manageable now where I can get through the day without having a panic attack. So I
good,
know how to control my mental health a little bit better because I
good.
always feel like until that's under control, even if I had the tools to know what to do, my brain is telling me otherwise. Like I have
Yeah.
an actual chemical imbalance, you know? So I'm like, all right, well, it doesn't do me any good not figuring out one side before trying to figure out the other one.
Right.
So I was able to talk to a psychiatrist that I still talk to every Tuesday night. And it's been great. You know, I talked to a therapist before when I was going through my divorce. Um, and I thought that I probably would end up inevitably talking to another one because of the death of my dad.
Yeah.
So this was a little bit overdue. I should have probably talked to her sooner, but you know, it's better late
Taking
than
that step is
never.
hard though. Yeah.
It
Taking that
is.
step is
And it's
hard.
timely and it's expensive, you know, so it's never like it's never in your favor. You know, insurance is weird and we don't really prioritize mental health like we should. A lot's not covered, and that's why people can't get the help that they necessarily need. So, you know, but I was like, I need to do this, like I need to figure this out. So I went to a therapist and learned those tools of okay, I'm in a better place now where my mood is stable. I'm not having panic attacks as often. Now what? So that really helps me a lot. I learned a lot about myself. And then I learned that talking made me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was never like that. I didn't like to talk about my feelings. I didn't like to talk about why I was irritated, upset, all the things. So I was like, okay, I only go to therapy one time a week though, and I'm not going to pay. I can't go every day. You know, I'm like, realistically, I
Does your
can't afford
insurance
it.
cover it or no?
Nothing. It covers
All right.
nothing at all. So I was like,
I
I'm already
just
paying
talked
out of pocket. Like,
I had just talked to my therapist about this because this week, because I was looking at something for my podcast with Todd, and I can't remember what it was, for mental health headline hot takes. And I saw that, oh God, I shouldn't have started this because I don't remember now. But anyway, I asked my therapist, and she said actually a lot of um, people in her network, like their caseload has lightened up a lot, and they're looking for new clients. Where 2 years ago with COVID, like everyone was doing too many caseloads.
oh,
And so we
sure.
got in this discussion because I remember I have lots of therapists now in my network of friends and acquaintances, and a lot of them don't take insurance because it's so complicated for them. Right. And then the other thing is I have my therapist does it, but she does it because she used to do billing. So she knows all the nuance of like getting paid by insurance. But
Yeah.
even that, she's like, they don't pay us like what our rates are. They tell us what they're going to pay us.
Yeah.
And it's just so fucked up, pardon my language,
No, it
but it's
is.
so fucked up. And, you know, I'm the kind of person who, yeah, let's talk about it, name it to tame it. I agree with that. But I don't want to hear Elmo come on and did you see that from a few weeks ago?
What was
Where
that?
Elmo tweeted, "How's everyone doing today?" or something like that, and then a whole bunch of people replied with how sad they were, like celebrities, everything. And then Joe Biden comes in and he replies and he's like, "Yeah, it's okay to be sad, and you know, mental health is a big." It's like, well, why don't you do something about
Right.
that,
If you know
right?
it's a
Because
big
it's
thing, then let's do something about it.
right. Like,
Right.
let's get people coverage. And there are things happening that I think are moving us in the right direction. Todd and I talk about like the news related to mental health every week.
For sure.
And there's places that are like giving college students free mental health sessions provided by the school. Like, there's legislation, I think, I can't, it might be Georgia or Florida. There's like legislation to guarantee mental health. And again,
For
college
sure.
students, but it's a start. So
Right.
it's awful to when I hear these stories of people who need it, want it, and can't have access to it.
I agree. Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, same way with medication. Some of my medication, one medicine they wanted to give me was like not covered at all. And I'm like, I can't pay for
And
that
they
every month.
and they have a
You
patent
know,
on it, so there's
it's
no
the same
generic.
boat. Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
the same boat. So yeah, it's terrible. And you know, I just going back to like why I started Panic Button and you know, I just, like I said, talking helped. And I was like, I need a realistic situation. I need a realistic solution. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to start a podcast. I had no intentions of having any guests on it. I was like, I'm just going to talk to myself. And if people like it, they like it. Great. And I asked my mom and my partner, I remember it, I was like, do you guys think this is a good idea? Like, do you think that anybody would find value in this? Like, or am I just going to be wasting my time? And they both looked at me and they're like, well, you don't really talk about your feelings. So do you think this is a good idea? They're like,
It's like
because you know
30
that
seconds.
you have to be vulnerable, right? And I was like, okay. I was like, fair, very fair. I was like, but my drive behind it, and I'll stand on this, is I didn't have help when I got diagnosed with this. I was given medication in college and told, Godspeed, good luck, like figure it out. And I would have loved to have heard stories of people going through it that didn't make me feel like I was going insane or like I was an outsider, like people that were actively going through it, everyday people like myself. And that's where I was like, okay, if this works, it works. So I got a microphone and started recording it. My first couple episodes released in January, and the feedback was great. People were like, thank you for talking about mental health and sharing your stories and just being open. I would go on there and just rant for 15 minutes and people were like, it was great. They were like,
Yes,
we
that's
love the
relatable.
authenticity of like what you're going through, and you're just being so transparent and open and showing the reality of mental health. And I'm like, yeah, because we're all going through it and it's not talked about enough. I said, so if I'm not going to talk about it, who's going to talk about it? You got to be that change that you want to see. So I was like,
goosebumps. That's one of my favorite lines.
so I
Be the
was like, all
change.
right, I was like, let's do it. So, and now I think we're like 12, 13 episodes. Don't quote me, but they come out every Monday. I was fortunate enough, obviously, to have you on and other great people in this network that we've met. And it's been great. People want to come on. They want to share their story. They love that I give them a platform, a safe space to do that. And it's very humbling and I love it. And I hope that it gets in the right hands, the people who need it. I know I'm not a therapist. I don't give medical advice. I'm not a doctor. Grey's Anatomy does not count. But I hope that some people take something away from it and just see the authenticity of this is real and we're going through it, and we're going to figure it out, whatever that looks like. So
one of the things I really like, at first I thought you were crazy when I saw this, because you have posted on your social media that, hey, and I think you say it in your podcast too, hey, if you have a story and you're interested, reach out to me or fill out this, form, contact me form. And at first I was like, oh my God, you're going to attract like, you know what I mean? Like,
you're like, I don't know. That might not be the best move.
Yeah, I get people DMing me trying to come on my podcast, and like, my podcast is, I just realized this, I've been talking about it like nonstop, but I just realized my podcast is very like stream of thought. Like, what am I thinking about in that time? Oh, I got to go find someone. And it started last week because I had a expert on burnout come on my podcast, and she just recently wrote a best-selling book, The Cure for Burnout, Emily Ballesteros. She's getting all sorts of shout outs from me everywhere these days because I'm like, I've been feeling so burnt out. I've been, and if I'm being authentic, every time a new season of the show comes out, it's really hard. And
Sure.
I don't feel right. And then I talk to people from it, obviously, with the foundation and everything. But I don't feel right because it's a reminder that now comes every 6 months for several weeks, if not months at a time. And it's just a reminder that like, wow, I did this thing. And then it reminds me like, oh my God, I got married. And then I lost that relationship, and how important it was to me, how important she is to me, and how important the family is. And I just get myself in this rut, right? Where I'm like there, but I don't remember. Oh yeah. So my podcast is very stream of thought. Like, what am I thinking about right there? And I'm like, I'm feeling burnt out. I'm kind of struggling with, focusing and getting the things done I want to get done. And then I found her book, actually looking for, burnout resources. And I'm like, oh, I got to have her on. And so I get a lot of people that want to come on the show, and I very much want to I wish I could do that. Right. I wish I could do what you're doing and say, hey, person, come on. And I don't mind talking to anybody, right? I think that's what's cool about shows like this and yours. But I think it's very cool and very unique that you're inviting anybody on who has a story to tell, and or at least give them the opportunity to reach out to you. And I think that's such a very rare thing in the podcasting space, especially because everybody hustles who's doing a podcast. It isn't easy, despite like people think it's this cakewalk. It's just really not. It's a lot of work, and it's not money. There's not a lot of money unless you're a big one. So people are chasing, people are chasing larger guests with bigger followings and stuff like that because they want to pop a podcast. And so, instead of doing that, I think it's cool that you're just inviting normal people on, because those kinds of conversations are the ones that people relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, that's kind of like something that I've recognized as well. Like, I get a lot of DMs of like therapists who want to come on, and I've got some people that have been like, I don't know, like, I don't like talking to therapists because they just try to come on and doctor the situation. I'm like, no, like, I literally, the conversations I've had with therapists are super fucking cool because they are literally like surviving and working in the industry that they battle themselves, So like the therapist that I've talked to, it's more of like, well, what's your story? Because like, we never take the time to think about like the stuff that my therapist is going through. It's always like, I'm coming to you with my problems, so screw your problems. So I let them like air out their dirty laundry and talk about the opposite side of it, So it's great. I'm like, oh, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not here for the advice. They're not here to doctor anyone. They're here because that's another part of mental health we don't talk about, is how hard it is for these professionals to be mentally sane, to be honest, like to keep it cool, all the things that they hear, all the things that they battle. So I was like, well, you guys deserve a platform as well, so come on, let's go.
Yeah.
We'll take them all.
When I first started with my therapist, one of the things I told her, because I had a therapist when I was like 21 for a little bit, not very long. I wasn't ready. You got to be, that's another thing with therapy. You've got to be ready to do the work and learn stuff about yourself that you may not want to learn.
Exactly.
And so that's the bit. But with mine now, I was like, hey, like the personal human connection is going to be super important to me. So like, I do need to know about you. I honestly don't even think I care if she made it up, as long as it was consistent. But one of the things that last year was, the last 2 years were probably the two hardest of my whole life. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I did a little bit of coaching. And I struggled with imposter syndrome doing that, because I'm like, I want to like curl up in a ball and die. Why am I coaching, people on how to show up as their better self, right? And she told me, she's like, nobody becomes a therapist unless they're like fucked up themselves. And so she's like, they at the very least, they make the best therapist because they can relate, right? Yeah. And I think people also, and you make a great point on this, people think, I don't know that people have the right perception of what therapists are and what they do. They're not, they're clinical, or they should be, at least in this state they are. They're clinical, mental health counselors, but they're not doctors, right? They may have a doctorate in psychology, or some may be psychiatrists too. I don't know the nuances of all that, but they're actually, I almost think like therapists are really communication experts, because they help you communicate with them, communicate with others, and communicate with yourself.
Absolutely.
And they teach you how to reflect. They're not, I don't think they're diagnosing as much as people think. Like, people think they're going to walk in and it's like, boom, you've got A, B, C, D, here's the DSM-5, and now here's how we fix you, and you'll be good to go in 2 weeks. It isn't like that. No. It's a constant reflection. It's a constant changing the way you communicate with yourself, changing the way you communicate with others, changing the way you communicate at work. It's just a constant state of reflection and asking yourself, why do I feel this way? Why is this upsetting? Why did this happen? And just reframing things to talk better to yourself so that you can show up better as yourself. So I think it's great. you should have therapists on. You know, I do too. And sometimes it's more fun. Sometimes it's more serious. It kind of depends on what my mood is, but they're normal people too. They're not
Yeah.
unattainable,
Nope.
unrelatable people that are like authoritarian or better than you.
No, exactly. And the conversations that I've had with them almost make me appreciate my therapist more, like, you know, and what she has to offer. So yeah, it's been great. You know, I love having people of all different walks of life really come on, because then we just really get to see at the end of the day how relatable and how similar we all are. You know, and I always say,
Humans
like, if one piece resonates with somebody, great. If they take
worth it.
nothing away from it, listen to it again. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, it's just great. It's been great, and it's been super therapeutic. So that's really how it started for me, and I wouldn't have it any other way right now. I'm just enjoying the ride.
I love that. And by the way, I'm proud of you for starting it, because it took me 10 years to start a freaking podcast after talking about it. So good for you. And I'm glad that you're finding the therapeutic side of it. And I encourage everyone to check it out. The link is going to be in the show notes. It's the Panic Button Podcast. I'll also drop your Instagram down there too. Before we go, is there anything that you want to ask me for the Ask Me Anything that you didn't ask or want to ask again, maybe, and see if...
I know, I've been thinking about this one, because I'm like, what didn't I ask before? Huh. I guess just like, you know, personal wise, like, I know on your Instagram you say that you do it yourself a lot still.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what are you still DIYing? Is that the right way to ask?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I DIY so much stuff. I do. So here's a fun fact. I still DIY my toothpaste, but I do have a brand that I use called True Eden. And
Okay.
yeah, she was a registered nurse, Leslie Guevara. She actually was the second guest on my podcast, where she
Awesome.
came in and talked about her journey of why she developed this toothpaste and how it saved her daughter's life after an infection. And so I've been using that primarily. And let me tell you, like, my dentist is, for the most part, they're always like, floss more, but for the most part, keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. And I'm like, all right, this is
All
good
right.
stuff. Yeah, True Eden. But otherwise, I make so much of my own stuff. I make my own condiments. I make my own barbecue sauce. I make my own ketchup. I make my own body wash.
So why did you start it, if you don't mind me asking then? Like, what was your, like, this is why I'm doing this?
I could get myself canceled probably, or more shadow banned than I already am. So when I was probably about 10 years ago, my friend who became my roommate shortly after that was like, hey, did you know fluoride is a neurotoxin and it's in our toothpaste? And I'm like, whatever, dude. Yeah, okay. So I looked into it, and that's where it began. And that's where my whole, like, I never really trust media or anything. I always feel like I'm kind of being fed something, and I take it as a grain of salt. But when I started looking into the way that, like, our food and some of our products are made, and the chemicals and the things in there, and then I started thinking to myself, like, okay, well, I'll make my own toothpaste. Like, it's actually, these ingredients are good for your teeth. It was baking soda, coconut oil, and then essential oils. Like, those are things that are in all sorts of stuff, right?
Sure.
And so then I went down and I was like, well, the soap thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try. So I start reading about the soaps, and I always had some eczema on my arm and on my finger that would pop up. And I realized, I'm like, there's so many things in the soap that could be causing my eczema.
Oh,
so
sure.
I started
Yeah.
making my own body wash. And listen, I was a dude. I was using Irish Spring, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. And I upgraded from the bar to the body wash at some point in my 20s, right? And so I just started looking at that. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I started making my own body wash. I just looked up different recipes and stuff. I started making my own body wash, and my eczema went away.
Wow.
And it was, yeah, like, I haven't had it since. So I've been making my own body wash now. Oh God, it's been 5-6 years maybe now.
Wow.
And it's a game changer. Like, to not have that anymore.
Yeah, I have
And then,
tried it myself, so might need to
yeah, hey, it's
dive
an
into that.
easy recipe too. I have it on my social. I'll send it over to you. But
Yeah,
it's
please.
funny because I was just looking into this weekend making bar soap. Because I was like, oh, maybe I'll, try. I'll buy like a Dr. Bronner's soap when I travel. And last
Yeah.
time I was thinking, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll try to make bar soap. So we'll see. But yeah, I make a lot of my own stuff. I do. I've
I
made my
like
own
it.
cleaning stuff too. It's just there's so much bad stuff out there. We're
Yeah.
exposed to it every day. And
Oh
when
yeah.
I started to like cure my eczema and like learn about eating organic food and learning about GMOs and like all
Oh
this stuff
yeah.
that can really be damaging. It just kind of took me in the rabbit hole. Now I don't believe it. I've started thinking like, am I actually being targeted by a holistic community who is pushing a narrative that may actually be not true too? I
Right?
don't know. There's a little bit of a conspiracy. I say I dabble in conspiracy theories. Like
Oh yeah.
I like to
I
go
think we
down the
all
rabbit
do.
hole. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
like to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, and I'll probably find some truth in there, or get the hell out of there because it's horrifying.
Nice. I
So
like
yeah,
it. No,
that's
I
mine.
like it. I was curious, so that's cool.
Yeah, no
It's
one's
very
asked me that
cool.
before, actually, which is
Mm,
interesting. I don't think so.
yeah.
Yeah. Good question. Well, where can people find you and where can people find the podcast?
Yeah. So best way to find me is on Instagram. It is panic_button podcast. And the podcasts right now are available on our YouTube channel and Spotify. There's a link tree on the Instagram, so that's the easiest way. So just go message me on Instagram, say hi, give me a follow, like something. Sometimes I say something funny. I'll probably reach out to you if you DM'd me. I'm pretty active with my followers, and yeah, it's pretty it's a good time. I like to have fun. So
Yeah. Well, I will say one correction there. The easiest way is to click the link in the show notes of what you're listening to right now.
there you
Second
go.
easiest way, go to your Instagram, give you a follow. And thank you for coming on. And, I think I told you at the beginning, I purposely didn't want to know your story because I wanted to walk through it and hear it from your words. So I want to thank you for sharing it. I'm sorry for, the loss of your father and the sort of open-endedness of that. But I think it's admirable that you've turned your podcast into a way to help grow and heal and help others and give other people space. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, yep. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. It's been great. It's fun talking to you again.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.